Hey everybody! All right, so this is part two of early United States notes. Where we last left off, we had ratified the Constitution, and this needs to come up. Okay, so we'd already talked about the Federalist and the Federalist Papers. We beat that to death in class. I think you get the idea. The gist of it is the federal government can keep the people in line from craziness, but there's also separation of powers to keep the government from going crazy itself. Now, Anti Federalists made a bunch of points. Yes, yes. Okay, so we end up with Washington getting elected in 1788. As I mentioned in the last set, I said that your second place person becomes vice president. So John Adams was vice president of Washington. Washington was reluctant to run for office, but he'd been at the Constitutional Convention. He'd been a military leader. Like, he is the respected guy out there. Does he have his flaws? Yes, he owns slaves. It's bad. There's no getting around it. But he also is a product of his era and is a believer in the Constitution and the good things that come with the Constitution. So we have to kind of put that, I think, in context of what's happening here. So great, comes in as president. What's he do? Okay, he is going to sign into law the creation of a federal government. The Constitution gives you bare bones directions, but very few specifics. So he's going to sign into law, or at least um, promote the Bill of Rights, creates a judiciary, including a Supreme Court, creates the entire executive branch with all these parts that I mentioned before. However, I mentioned all these guys. The two people are the most influential in Washington's administration are Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And we have, Secretary of State, huge position, basically America's foreign policy guy or woman, if we go forward, but guy. And then we have Alexander Hamilton over here. Now, Jefferson had written the Declaration of Independence, complicated fellow. He owned slaves, yet he writes those words that we have in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Once again, a product of his era. He describes slavery as like having a wolf by the ears. You don't like it, but you don't dare let him go. If you get a wolf, you let him go, they bite you. So he freed all these slaves, destroys the economy, it has social issues. So he's kind of like, I can't get out of it, and it was a trap. On the same side, he ends up having kids with one of his current slaves. After his wife dies, he ends up essentially having a girlfriend who's one of his own slaves who lives in the basement um, of his plantation. So once again, complicated guy, genius, one of the writes some of the most inspiring words on the planet, but yet owns people. Hamilton, on the other end, is an elitist. No getting around it. He's an elitist. We'll talk about his programs. Um, Jefferson's more of a man of the people kind of guy. He's like, everyone should be, or every white person should be farmers. They should be their own person. They should have independence. They should have liberty. And Hamilton's more like, you know what, I don't necessarily trust liberty with everybody. We should have a rule by a well educated elite who know what they're doing. A strong central government will ensure all that. So these two are the origins of America's first two political parties, at least after the Constitution. I get it, there were the Anti Federalists and the Federalists, but the Federalists dominate, and they're going to be the first political party, and Jefferson is going to form the Republicans, but it's not the Republicans of today. It's the Republicans who are going to become the Democratic Republicans, which are then going to become today's Democrats. So arguably, today's Democratic Party has origins in Thomas Jefferson. Does that mean Hamilton is the founder of today's Republicans? No, not really. And honestly, a lot of the things Jefferson stands for, a lot of Republicans would agree with today. So as I said the other day, there's very hard to pin these people down in terms of where they would go with today's politics. Okay, so Hamilton is our Secretary of the Treasury, financial genius. And his goal is to create a stable America with good finances. So let me tell you about all the things he does in his plan. And these are all passed as part of various bills. So everything that is suggested here becomes law and is signed into law by George Washington. First off, if you're going to run a federal government, you have to have money. You have to have money. Running a military costs money. And granted, the government does a lot less in this era, but still, you need money to run things. So first off, you're going to tax liquor. Liquor, absolutely. Liquor was a commodity that a lot of farmers grew on the frontier. They took wheat and grain and made it into, in a lot of cases, whiskey. So it's largely a whiskey tax. So you, as a farmer, have to pay tax on the whiskey that's getting created. This is going to cause a lot of resentment in farm areas because the easiest way to get stuff to market is to turn it into liquor. Imagine trying to carry bushels and bushels and bushels of grain. Well, all you got to do is synthesize it down and make it into liquor, and it's easy to transport and probably more profitable. So Hamilton raises money off of liquor, and today, the federal government still taxes liquor. It's called a sin tax. Tariffs. We are going to put taxes on foreign goods. The goal is if you make foreign goods expensive, you're going to buy American stuff. So if you make British or French cabinets more expensive, that's going to enhance the American cabinet industry. That is popular in both the North and the South because both areas felt like they were going to industrialize. Turns out the South doesn't industrialize and will grow to hate tariffs. But when the plan of Hamilton comes in the 1780s and 90s, popular on both ends. Controversially, we're going to try to create a stable money supply and stable interest rates. So interest rates are the cost to borrow money. It's a little complicated, but Jefferson wants to found a Bank of the United States, aka the BUS. The BUS is going to be established in 1791 and have permission to exist for 20 years. The hope is to renew it again. So the BUS will exist until 1821. What can the BUS do? The BUS can issue bonds. What that means is they will be able to borrow money on behalf of the United States. So if the United States needs money for something, they can issue these bonds. If you ever have a savings bond work is you buy it at a price below the face value. After a series of years, it becomes the face value, and then you sell it and you get it for the face value. So the difference between what you buy it for and the face value is interest. Government money. So when government collects, say, the liquor tax, it will go in the Bank of the United States. And finally, the biggest power the BUS has is to set interest rates. They can decide by controlling the supply of money how much interest is going to be in the United States. And generally speaking, the BUS is going to keep interest rates relatively high so banks can make money, which allows them to loan out more money, which they can make more money off of. A lot of rural people are opposed to the BUS because it makes it hard to borrow money. And farming is highly debt intensive. You usually borrow money to get property, equipment, and seed, that kind of thing. But BUS goes through. Pay off the national debts. So there was a national debt. We owed a ton of money to people who had bought bonds during the Revolution. French people, Dutch people, and American citizens. There were American citizens who lent the government money during the Revolution. Unfortunately, a lot of those people who had lent money were given bonds. Like, let's say I buy, this is a bond, this is a $20 bond. I buy it from the federal government for $15 in 1780. And it says, oh, well, this will end up being $20 in 1791. Well, it didn't look like I'd be able to sell this for $20. So a lot of people who had bonds sold them for below face value. So I might sell this $20 bond for $10, hoping that I'm going to get something. So a lot of the people who own the national debt, meaning who are owed by the US government, are speculators. They're people who are going to buy up cheap bonds in bulk and hope to get paid in full. So if I buy this bond for $10 and I can get 20 for it, I'm going to make a big profit. And Hamilton's like, hey, doesn't matter. We have to pay off the national debt. If we don't pay off our debts, no one will loan us money in the future, and we will be a financial pariah. So he pays off the national debt. We pay off the debts from the Revolution, and we have paid off every debt that we have ever taken as a U.S. government. Every time we issue bonds, we pay them off. Our bonds are some of the most secure on the planet and trusted, and that starts with Hamilton. And that makes our dollar stable, that makes our bonds stable, and overall, it creates a stable economy. Now, they also agree to pay off the states' war debts. So a lot of southern states had borrowed money to fight the war. So North Carolina owes bonds to people. So the federal government says, yeah, the war was for the good of the country. We're going to also pay off state war debts. And that was a way to get some of the southern states to buy into this whole plan. And finally, to entice the South into this, The U.S. Capitol will get moved from New York, which is a northern state, into Maryland. However, they're not going to have it in Maryland. They're going to create the District of Columbia. It is the only district in the country. District of Columbia is surrounded by Maryland on three sides and across the river from Virginia, across the Potomac. It is located right next to what is today Georgetown. Georgetown was an older community, but overall, the whole capital is going to get moved to the swampy area along the Potomac, and that is where it sits today. So it's funny when Trump says we're going to drain the swamp. Like literally, there was a swamp that had to get drained to get parts of Washington, D.C. to be located in Washington, D.C. So when Washington was sworn in, it was actually sworn in at Federal Hall on Wall Street in New York City, not in Maryland and not in Washington, D.C., because it doesn't exist. And the first U.S. Capitol was actually Philadelphia during the Revolution and during the Articles of Confederation. So we've actually had three cities be our U.S. Capitol. Okay, so here's sort of the two parties that start to evolve. Remember, we talked about factions under the Federalist Papers. Well, we're going to end up with two big factions. So let me underline what the Federalists want and what the Republicans want. So on one end, we have the Federalists. This is the pro-Hamilton party. If you've seen the musical Hamilton or know the songs, you actually probably know some of this stuff. So what we have is Hamilton is a Federalist. Washington is a Federalist. John Adams is a Federalist. So a lot of these people in the early government are Federalists. Generally, you're coastal, so you're along the coast, you're doing trade with the rest of the world. You're urban, so you live in a city, or you are living in the Northeast, or you are wealthy. So someone like Washington has a plantation that's along the Potomac, which is along the coast, and he's wealthy and he's from Virginia. Now, the Virginian thing doesn't fit in, but everything else fits the categories. Hamilton lives in New York. Hamilton lives in a major city. Makes sense. Okay, so they believe in what's called loose construction. Loose construction is a philosophy that the Constitution is very broad, meaning the federal government can be powerful, that the government in D.C. should be able to do things like tax whiskey. The federal government should be able to regulate trade between states. Federal government should be strong. States' rights, less. States can set some rules, but overall, the federal government is the top dog. What country do they like? They're pro-British. We did more trade with Britain during the revolution, prior to the revolution. Our biggest trade partner was Britain. Still can be our biggest trade partner. We're going to make them a lot of money. Let's trade with Britain. Bus, they love it. They think there should be a national bank controlled by elites. And finally, their vision, business. Promote business. Businesses borrowing money, businesses making profit. America will be full of businesses. And yes, farms are fine and farms are businesses, but ultimately we're going to be a nation more of merchants than a nation of farmers. Okay, the anti-Hamilton party, and really the Republicans, which is what we're going to call them, and they were called then, the Republicans are not formed really by themselves. They're formed as a reaction to the Federalist Party. And the chief of the Republicans ends up being Thomas Jefferson. Okay? Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention, and frankly, Jefferson might have opposed some of the parts of the Constitution. His supporters of the Republicans are rural. They don't want to be told what to do by an outside force. They don't want to be taxed by an outside force. They want to do what they want to do. They don't need government. Western, people living out west want more freedom. It also overlaps with some of the rural. Tend to be Southern people, once again, overlaps with the rural. And finally, poor. Poor are like, hey, the government's doing nothing for me. You are favoring the well-educated and the elite and big business. So that doesn't fit really with today's philosophies, because one could argue today's Republicans would say, yeah, we support big business because they're job creators, but we also support, say, the forgotten man, as Trump would say. So, like I say, this doesn't fit perfectly. He's a strict constructionist. He believes the federal government should do as little as possible. Federal government should, yes, maintain order and have a military, but shouldn't get involved in tons of other things. He actually philosophically probably would have opposed the Louisiana Purchase, but it was just too much of a deal to pass up. We'll get to that later. States' rights. Ultimately, the states are countries, and states should be able to do mostly what they want with limited federal government interference. Hates the bus. Well-educated elites control the bus. Money supply should fluctuate. Local banks, states should all be able to issue currency. Nation that they support. France, France, France. France had been our ally during the revolution. France has its own revolution to become more democratic. They're Francophiles, as opposed to Anglophiles, which, like Britain, which are Federalists. And finally, Jefferson's vision of America is a nation of farmers. That was his whole township and range system. Everybody can live on a farm in a township, and all can go to the town hall and have a school and be educated people living on farms. That was his vision. So, those are the two sides. A couple things happened during Washington's administration. There's a whiskey rebellion. Like, another rebellion? Yeah, it's another rebellion. And once again, it's another rebellion out west. So it's very similar to Bacon's Rebellion back in the 1670s. It's similar to Shays' Rebellion out in the 1780s. Remember, the Shays' Rebellion triggers the Constitutional Convention. Well, once again, we have upset farmers. What are these guys upset about? Whiskey taxes. Remember, Hamilton put in a whiskey tax. These guys out in western Pennsylvania, our farmers, rely on whiskey to get their grains to market, to make it into whiskey, so they're getting taxed. Like, this is not fair, and they take up arms and start causing trouble. The U.S. military and the Pennsylvania militia gets called out to put down the rebellion. George Washington literally goes out to command troops in the field. It's the only time we've had a president as commander-in-chief actually command troops in the field. This is a painting of Washington commanding troops. We are not going to send Donald Trump into Afghanistan to go command troops in the field. We are not going to send Franklin Roosevelt during World War II to run tanks in the middle of France. So this is one time we actually do that. We will never, I don't think, do it again. Anyway, Risky Rebellion gets put down, and it actually shows that the federal government can be effective, and ultimately the federal government is going to get its way. Election of 1892 or 1792, once again, Washington wins in a landslide. Adams becomes vice president. DeWitt Clinton from New York becomes the third place candidate, but that doesn't get him in there. And notice these guys aren't running as party, they're running as people. So second place in the Electoral College is Adams. So once again, the administration stays as it is. Now, during the Washington administration, let's talk about some foreign policy. We have a ton of French issues. France, if you're not aware, in 1789 starts to lose its head. They have the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Anyway, they're inspired by the American Revolution, the people of France, and overthrow the monarchy. They then proceed to have civil turmoil for basically a 20-year period of time, almost 30-year period of time, finally ending with Napoleon being defeated in 1815. The French, because they are being revolutionary themselves, will end up in a series of wars with the British, who see the French as weak because they're in the middle of a war. So there's a picture of the guillotine in France you can use to chop off people's heads. So we'd signed an alliance in 1778 that says, yeah, we'll be friends with the French. We're your allies. Well, in 1793, they're like, hey, let's join. We got to get together. We got to fight the British. And like I said, there'd been wars on and off between 1793 and 1815 over controlling France and England and Europe and all that kind of thing. So anyway, the French try to get us to fight with the British, and we're like, that was fun, but we're going to have a neutrality proclamation. So one of the biggest foreign policy problems that Washington has is dealing with France, who want us to ally, and we'd sign an alliance, but guess what? We don't follow through with it because we're just a fledgling nation and we could be crushed by Britain. Like, it ain't worth the effort. In 1793 and 94, a Frenchman, Citizen Genet is what he gets called. Citizen is what people are trying to call each other in France, not like elitists, but everyone's a citizen, comes to America and goes up and down the coast making speeches against the British and pro-French, basically trying to recruit America to get involved in the French and British War. And a lot of public opinion supports Citizen Genet. Very good public speaker, charismatic. And Washington's like, even if the public's into this, we should not do this as a country. So we don't end up getting involved in their conflicts, but it gets close. And in fact, Jefferson, our foreign policy guy, thought we should probably get involved on the side of the French versus the British. Haiti. Oh, Haiti. Well, this is pretty random. Okay, so remember, Haiti was still part of the French Empire. In 1791, Toussaint L'Ouverture, who I have here, a former slave educated in France, is going to lead a slave rebellion in Haiti. And the slaves are going to take over Haiti and make it an independent country. Slaves, inspired by the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, are going to revolt. This goes over remarkably well, actually, with the Federalists. They're like, yeah, this is a good thing. However, if you're a slave owner, you do not want to have slaves thinking that they can be independent. So the United States will actually recognize Haiti as an independent country because the Federalists were okay with it. However, when Jefferson becomes president, he's going to say, no, we're not recognizing Haiti as an independent country because we don't want to give slaves hope. So Haiti ends up being this sort of like, hey, you're inspired by liberty. We love it, except we don't love that you're slaves because our slaves might revolt. British issues. British are still on the frontier causing problems. However, we do sign a treaty with the British called the Jay Treaty. John Jay, one of our Supreme Court justices, helped negotiate it. And we basically have a trade agreement with the British. We're now going to start trading back and forth, sending Britain stuff. They send us stuff. And it makes a lot of money, which the Federalists like. Big business. Spanish issues, we signed the Pinckney Treaty in 1795. That solidifies our boundary with Florida and what is today southern Mississippi and southern Alabama. So under the Jay Treaty, this ends up being the border, and then this territory actually becomes American because the Spanish had claimed this. So if you ever visited Florida, you're in territory that was once owned by the Spanish. Notice it's not the French, it's the Spanish. Okay. Finally, 1796, George Washington is going to give a farewell address. You guys are going to read an excerpt of this. The farewell address is going to lay out a whole bunch of things that Washington gives as advice to America. Interesting stuff. We'll talk about it in class. But I will say he wants us to not have foreign entanglements and not have political parties. Those are two of the highlights. And we've tended to ignore both of them. Okay, so 1896, we end up with John Adams, the sitting vice president, taking on Thomas Jefferson. Adams wins. Adams barely wins. Oh my gosh, my son's calling phone. Oh, that's funny. Hey, I'm doing a screencastify. I got to let you go. It's my cat. Bye. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, where am I? You'll notice there's now regional differences. The areas along the coast and the Northeast are now Federalists, and the areas in the South and the West are now Republican, as I told you earlier. Jefferson gets second place. Very bitter election, 51-49, even electorally. What is that? 3 or 4 point spread between the two. So super close. During Jefferson administration, it is super partisan, like so partisan that guys are chasing after each other with like tongs from fire and bats in Congress. This is a cartoon of Congress in the era, Federalists and Republicans going after each other. Now, today we may have a lot of partisan turmoil, but we're not, in most cases, in Congress at least, physically attacking each other. There's a quasi-war with France. When I mean quasi, I mean kind of a war with France. We keep sending ships to Britain as part of our Jay Treaty, and the French keep attacking them. So what Adams does is builds what we call wooden walls. He builds a bunch of ships made of wood to try to defend U.S. shipping interests. And we actually fight back and forth with French ships, even though we technically have an alliance with them. Adams, though, even though he has a ton of pressure from his own party to go to war with France, resists because we aren't a big enough country to go to war with France or England yet. And kind of an interesting sidelight, in 1797-98, that winter, we send some representatives to France to try to negotiate a peace. And when we send our representatives to France, the French ask for bribes so that we can negotiate. And the U.S. representatives to France send back a message that some anonymous Frenchmen are asking for bribes. They refer to the anonymous Frenchmen as XYZ. Hence, it's the XYZ affair. This becomes public that the French want bribes to negotiate. Americans are incredibly insulted, and this pushes even farther to get us to war with France. But Adams resists and resists and resists. And I think one of the biggest things Adams should get credit for is not going to war with France because it could have been disastrous. Okay, some other things Adams does that are not good for Adams or really good for the Federalist Party. In fact, Adams is going to kill his own party by going to the extreme. Adams is going to support the Alien and Sedition Act. It's actually two acts, but tends to be historically remembered as two acts. Both are completely partisan, completely designed to only help the Federalist Party, which Adams is a Federalist. So, first, he's going to extend the time it takes to become a citizen. Most people who are immigrating to the United States in the 1790s are turning out, once they start voting, to become Republicans. They tend to be poorer, tend to be farmers, and Federalists don't want any more Republicans. So they extend the time to become a citizen. I think they go from 5 to 7 years, hoping that there will be less Republican voters. It's essentially a voter suppression technique to lengthen this time. Is it legal? Yes. Is it blatantly partisan? Yes. Then, in what was today would be considered unconstitutional, the Sedition Act is passed. Sedition is speaking out against your own government. They make it illegal to speak badly about the Adams administration. It is a blatant suspension of the freedom of speech. These two are wildly disliked. Even a lot of Federalists are like, this is gone too far. There is going to be a massive reaction to the Alien and Sedition Act politically. So, one thing that happens is the states of Kentucky and Virginia, which are both controlled by Republicans, passed two resolutions in opposing the Alien and Sedition Acts called the Kentucky and the Virginia resolutions. And in essence, what they say is if a law is unconstitutional, a state shouldn't have to follow it. And these laws, especially the Sedition Act, are unconstitutional. That starts our sort of philosophical battle of how much can states tell the federal government what to do? And can a state decide what is unconstitutional? Remember this in the back of your head because it's going to keep popping up again and again in U.S. history. Think Civil War. Think Brown versus Board of Education. Think a lot of these states' conflicts. So here's a poster from the era. Republicans, turn out and save your country from ruin. Down with the Tories, down with the British faction. So they're pinning down the Adams administration and the Federalists as being pro-British, being just bad people. So in the election of 1800, Adams runs as a Federalist. Aaron Burr, who we haven't talked about yet, but Aaron Burr is going to run as a Republican, and Thomas Jefferson runs as a Republican. This is not great for the Republicans because they're going to split their ticket. Aaron Burr, by the way, is an absolute opportunist. He doesn't have any political principles. He just wants to be at power, but he has a very silver tongue. He's from the state of New York. He'd been a huge rival to Alexander Hamilton. We'll talk about that. Okay, so eventually, what ends up happening is this is the results of the election of 1800. So in the results, here's what happens. The electoral votes are TJ, 73, Aaron Burr, 73, John Adams, 65. Whoa, what? We have a tie in the Electoral College. So you may or may not know this, but in the Constitution, if you have a tie or no one has a majority of the Electoral College, get this, the House of Representatives gets to pick the president. And each state casts a ballot. So I think at the time there's 15 states, so there's going to be 15 ballots. And what if the state is split in their delegates? Like let's say they have 2 Federalists and 2 Republicans. There isn't a procedure in place. So today, funny story, if we have a tie in the Electoral College between Trump and Biden, the House will decide. And the House today is, I believe, 23 states for Democrats, 25 states for Republicans, or 24 states for Republicans, and 2 or 3 that are split. If we have a tie in the Electoral College, you're going to see a lot of chaos in this country. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm just previewing it for it. Well, they have chaos here. Here's Aaron Burr down here lurking. So the top 3 candidates end up going to the House to get chosen. That's how the Constitution reads. And what happens? Behind the scenes, Alexander Hamilton is going to work with the state delegations. The state delegations by this point are actually dominated by Republicans. So essentially, what Hamilton has to do is persuade the Federalists to either pick Thomas Jefferson or Aaron Burr. So even though Hamilton is a Federalist, he has enough influence on the Federalists that he can push the Federalists to pick between 2 Republicans. Think about this. Hamilton hates Jefferson, hates his politics. But guess what? He also hates Aaron Burr, and he believes that Aaron Burr is a slippery, evil fellow. And it's going to turn out that Aaron Burr is going to kill Alexander Hamilton. We'll talk about that later. However, Alexander Hamilton throws his weight behind Jefferson because he believes Jefferson is a good American who wants what's best for the country. They disagree philosophically, but he's like, Thomas Jefferson, you're a genius, and I know you love America. So Hamilton essentially gets the House of Representatives to pick Jefferson, and Jefferson becomes the next president of the United States. And that is where we will stop.